What is up, everybody? Welcome back here to the Devy, and we are doing a live mock. So I'm going to kind of doing these on the weekend as I have time, kind of going through some live mock and just kind of going through and just talking about kind of how the picks are going. So in terms of this, when we talk about kind of what we're looking at for the draft, 12 team superflex tight end premium, pretty common there in terms of what you're looking for. And then what we're going to be doing is just kind of diving into, where are the tier breaks? Let's talk about players. If you have any questions about rookies or dynasty, like anything you want, this is more of just a, hey, we're going to be doing a mock. You're going to see kind of how the board looks. But if you have questions, Devy, anything like that, you can always drop them in the comments or whatever, right? So when you're looking at just kind of Superflex and where it's looking in terms of, where are the picks going? First talk about Caleb and Marvin. Those, generally speaking, are kind of the first two off the board per usual, right? When we're talking about the rookie drafts and Superflex, there's a lot of talk about these guys in terms of, what are their values, right? We're hearing a lot of narratives about Caleb right now, a lot of narratives about Marvin, those type of things. And in reality, at this point, when we're thinking of like what they are as prospects, we still have a lot to learn, right? I do think it's Superflex. I think I was listening to a podcast. They were talking about when do you ever take Marvin at 101? The guy is very emphatic. No, you always take the quarterback. I think that there's some nuance to that, right? It depends on how your league drafts. It depends on what they look for. Me and Leo Pasiga, we do a dynasty draft all the time, and we talk about those type of things. Like, hey, when you're thinking of like, you can't be set in stone with the guys that you're just going to go with. If you're sitting at 101 and you have quarterbacks, you have two top 5 quarterbacks, and you can't move back, and you can't move back to the 102 because you really want Marvin. At a certain point, there comes a time where you just draft Marvin Harrison Jr., right? And I think that there's nuances to that into your rookie drafts and what you're trying to accomplish there. So that's just something to note. Like, as you get into it, you can't just set yourself up and say, I'll always move back, because it's league dependent. Some of your leagues just don't move in terms of that. So when we're looking at the board, Caleb Marvin's really those first two. And then it gets into those quarterbacks. So there's a lot of discussions out there about Drake May and Jaden Daniels. I've tweeted out kind of different things about each guy. And to be fair, I like them both. I think they both have some question marks. I think May, when you're looking at how he deals with pressure, I think, that offensive line is context, though. Yeah, he did have a terrible offensive line. So how much you take that into account in terms of him as a prospect? Jaden Daniels, love his upside from a rushing standpoint. Love all of that. He definitely was that late bloomer at LSU. Did really well in the SEC, though. So, he struggled at ASU. He is small. Like, there's those narratives there. And then you got Malik Neighbors, and then you have Brock Bowers, right? Those are your first 6 picks, generally speaking. Now, I tweeted out a DLF rookie mock from last year around this time, and even though there was nuance and a little bit of changes, those first 6 last year are the same as they are this year, right? Like, you pretty much, these are your guys. This is where your tier is at. So now that we kind of understand have a tier, I think when you're looking at it overall, you're like, okay, now that tier is there, I can really start kind of diving into where I want to move at. Where am I at? I get a lot of questions like, if I want to get into the 105, what do I got to give up, right? A back in second. Where is that pick going? So there is, now that we have our tiers, we can really start diving into it. We're going to talk about tiers. Once this is over, I'm going to kind of give an overview, but we'll talk about all those questions. And if you have questions about individual rookies, just drop them in the chat. I'll get to them. You have dynasty trade questions, you got anything, you guys can drop them there. Now, after that first tier, so you're sitting here with Bowers at 106, then this is pretty consensus now. And again, I'm worried. I get worried about that word consensus because, we don't know for sure what these landing spots are going to be. So you have Ndunze at 107, and some people think he's in with that tier, right, of Marvin Harrison Jr. He's in there. Then you have Franklin, right? You got Troy Franklin there, J.J. McCarthy, and Brian Thomas. I think in itself is probably their own tier. So when you're looking at like Franklin, McCarthy, Thomas, and Worthy, or maybe Worthy, but mostly Thomas, how people are thinking right now, that is its own kind of tier break in there. Now, JJ's the big one. I think JJ's going to be the controversial one. If he goes in the first round, he's golden in terms of like, hey, probably 109 to 112. You'd probably be pretty comfortable drafting there if you need that quarterback. I find myself at that 109 to 112 mark. If I need a quarterback, it's because I have probably Joe Burrow, maybe Kirk Cousins, and I'm looking at it like, hey, can I get that third guy, and can JJ kind of elevate my dynasty team, right? I still think personally JJ needs to go to a place where he sits for a year. That's why I really like the Vikings. That's why I don't know about the Falcons narrative. Like, they really are ready for a guy unless the Falcons go get a veteran, and then they still draft JJ McCarthy, right? So for me, JJ is going to have to sit. And I think that that's going to be the best thing for him. Then you have Brian Thomas. And then the guy that I think, in this draft, I love that he went 111. Xavier Worthy. I know that there's a lot of narratives out there in the space about Worthy. I know he had his drops. I still think he's talented. And I think, we did a podcast for our Patreon recently. We talked about these guys. Worthy to me is a guy that can play on the outside and in the slot. He can do both. I think he's actually pretty versatile when you're looking at his numbers and what he's able to do there. I really feel like, he can do those type of things that, that NFL offenses are going to want. And he's versatile too, where you get some of these guys, AD Mitchell, probably an X, right? Keon Coleman, probably an X. We'll get into that. Roman Wilson, slot, right? Corley, slot. You're looking at these kind of guys going there. McConkey, he's kind of all over the place in terms of where you think that he can be used. So when you're looking at overall, I think that's something to note with Worthy. Like, I think that ups his profile a little bit when we're looking at that. Now, sorry, I got to make this pick real quick. So when we're looking at this too, so when we're going through it, I want to get my guy just so I can talk about him later because I know he hasn't been picked yet. Did someone pick him? Oh, Jay Stein picked him. My guy got taken there, so I'll take my second guy. All right, so when you're looking at overall, when you're looking at the second round, AD Mitchell, I grabbed him. First running back off the board, Blake Corum. Now, the running back narrative is the one that, we're going to get into a lot because, I'm pretty responsible for a lot of the running backs in the rookie guide. So those of you that don't know, we did a 152 player profile version 1.0 of the rookie guide. And we're area scouts. So we kind of took a position and we really focused on it. And from the running back perspective, like one of the things that I look at from the running back perspective is these guys, when they get drafted, whether it's third, fourth, fifth round, wherever they're going to go, their special abilities, each one of these guys has something to gain or something to give a team based on a unique skill set, right? I think Blake Corum, for me, Blake Corum is that guy that is that inside zone rusher. I could see him having 10 touchdowns in a season, right? Just because of his ability to manipulate gaps, kind of, be good at the goal line and in the red zone. And he's not big, but he just is fluid, right? So he definitely could possibly be a fantasy asset you like in the beginning of the second round. Jonathan Brooks, same thing. Bucky Irving, right? So if I had to pick a Jonathan Brooks thing, I think his vision, his ability to kind of, play slow, but also have that quickness that you need. I comped him to, Le'Veon Bell in college in terms of like his ability to kind of manipulate angles. Had he not injured himself, he probably is running back one, overall, just because his class is deemed down, right? Bucky Irving, really good pass catcher. I do think that he has some struggles in his profile. David Wilsley, if you guys aren't following him, he's a fantastic follow. I call him my running back guru. He mentioned a lot of question marks he has with Bucky that I similarly do too. But, I think from a pass catching perspective, that's a skill, right? So if you're looking for skill-based guys that teams are going to utilize in PPR formats, those type of things, you can fall in love with those guys. Everybody knows I love Jalen Wright. I kind of has a hot take about him in terms of like, maybe him possibly being that running back one. But I think the big thing with all these running backs that you have to know is just when you're looking overall of like, who do you think like is going to be your guy? First landing spot's going to obviously matter, right? Just, hey, who are they at? And really, they're all in a tier one to themselves, right? So like Corum, Brooks, Irving, Benson, Lloyd, even Braylon Allen. I think Estime, right, could sneak in there. Really, those are the top six guys. And then landing spot and, where are they going to go? Now, if you're drafting prior to the NFL draft, now you have to really look at their profile and a skill set they do well, and you think it translates well, right? That is where you have to look for these running backs is, hey, will this skill translate to fantasy points? Could it be like a Kyron Williams situation, right? I tweeted out today, it's okay not to be locked in the prospects. I still believe that. Like Kyron Williams for us was a do not draft when he had that, like he was going like late first, 110 in that range. And we were right. And then last year he popped off and then we were wrong. That happens, right? So I think with the running backs, with the narrative, how it's shifted in Dynasty, we've talked about that a lot. I think when you're looking at it, just do they do a skill set well? Do they find themselves as a running back 2 or /3 that can push up that depth chart? Then you're going to smash them, right? And then we're going to draft them. We're going to talk about it. Now, I want to get through the rest of this kind of, the mock as we go through. And if you have any Dynasty questions, I see a bunch of you guys watching, drop them. You have some rookie questions on any of these guys, I will answer them. Trade questions, I know I have a few already. I will get to them here in a little bit. After, that first initial round, Michael Penix Jr. kind of going in that early second. Bo Nix. So that's where your tier 2 quarterbacks are until we figure out where they get drafted. Knicks is an interesting one. I think the most plausible, if you're a Bo Nix fan, would be someone moving up with the Ravens in that late first, like in the first round of the NFL draft, and going and grabbing Bo Nix, like a Giants or those type of things, right? Then, when you're looking at like Michael Penix Jr., I'm kind of out on that as a profile there. Don't love his profile, but you might still be in, right? But again, it's going to come down to that draft capital there. Then Jalen Wright, Roman Wilson, Polk, Corley really have skill sets that you kind of like. I like Roman Wilson. I liked him better when I was getting him in the 4th round, though. Late second, you're hoping that he gets that spot that you really like. Polk is a guy that I like. I know Jeff Bell doesn't like him, but we don't listen to Jeff Bell. Corley sitting at the late second. And then, Marshawn Lloyd. I think that, when I drafted him there, I think, looking at it, he's in that top 5 running backs. He's in that tier 1. Lloyd definitely has some question marks. I think, vision has been okay, explosiveness. I still think if he didn't get injured at South Carolina, he could have, been a running back 1 now, and you're just talking about production, because he had that profile there. Xavier Leggett, when you're looking at Wilson, right? Then you're looking at Braylon Allen, Rattler sneaking in there in the 3rd round. Jatavian Sanders. Some people love Jatavian Sanders. To me, he really is not an inline guy. I think he can play kind of inline, but he's really, really, really going to have to develop there, right? He's going to have to be that outside guy in the slot. Devontae Walker. Estime. Again, I like Estime. When you're looking at his PFF grades, I love his missed tackles forced. I think he's sneaky athletic too. And usually we only use that for white running backs, but I do think Estime is sneaky athletic. I think that there are times on his tape when he's making guys miss in the open field, he's hurdling guys. Like Estime is the real wild card, because I loved a lot of stuff that I saw on tape. I really, really love that. Then you're looking at Baker. I know he's been shooting up there. Michael Pratt is a fun 3rd round pick, right? And the way that the tiers kind of look here, I love taking like Pratt in the 3rd over Michael Penix in the early 2nd. I'll take a shot on Pratt's profile, because I do think that I think teams are going to like Pratt's ability to get the ball out quick, understand offenses. The Shanahan type of coach will like a Pratt, right? Where, Michael Penix Jr. is really going to have that offense kind of built around him. So those are the type of things you have to think of when you're in rookie drafts. Where's the tiers at? Where's the value fall too, right? And if you want to take Michael Penix Jr., trade back if you can, right? League dependent, as I already mentioned. Then you have Jamari Thrash in there. And then the 4th round, you just kind of throwing dots. I like Sinet if he's going to play. Kansas State guy, if he's going to play tight end. I think that there could be some fullback type packages for him. So that kind of limits his ceiling. Jermaine Burton Fun, Aeneas Smith, Brendan Rice, Theo Johnson. You know what? Christian's a big believer in him. C. Williams NFL. He does a lot of stuff here at the Devy Royale. Really likes Theo Johnson. And that was a guy that we liked from Devy perspectives, right? When we talk about Devy and watching these guys. He's an interesting case because he's a Canadian kid. Shout out Todd in our Discord. He's a Canadian kid that had to kind of learn the game as you went. You see that kind of athleticism the last couple of years in a offense that has been terrible. Penn State has had a terrible offense when you're looking at it. Will Shipley, Jan McMillan, Malik Washington, we'll get into him. I see Matthew jumped on the train there. Kendall Milton, McClellan, Gore, and Ollie. All right. Now, when you're looking at it overall, just kind of breaking down each person's kind of where the tiers are. I don't really necessarily care who people drafted, because, this is just preference as of right now based on profiles. But again, and I think that, brings up a good point here. Interesting. I think I would need to be talked into Ndunze not being in that 106, 107 tier pre-landing spot. Yeah, I mean, it really just depends. I think from an analytical perspective, when you're looking at like Jay Stein and what he breaks down, that late breakout, I think could be a concern. And we talked about that on the Patreon pod. But then I give context, right? Washington in this first 2 years, they were awful. Offensively, they fired their coach after his sophomore year. Was not great, right? In terms of that, like what he put on the field. Quarterback play, they had Dylan Morris. If you don't know who that is, it doesn't matter. And then, hey, DeBoer gets there. All that kind of stuff is going in there. And I like the fact that he kind of popped off his senior year. He had that production that you like to see from Rome. I think landing spot is going to be huge, right? So when you're thinking of like, that 106, 107, if Bowers goes to the Titans and let's say Ndunze goes to, the Giants where he's the wide receiver 1, that could get flipped in tight end premium, right? This is tight end premium. So I do see that perspective there. I like Rome in terms of like him as a prospect. But he's closer to my tier 2 than the other guys. And Bowers could come in as a top 5 guy immediately. So I think there's value to be said there. In terms of investment gain, how much your rookie year projection plan and how willing we should take a player after a big break and one. Yeah, that is the question, right? So, that's definitely a better question for Stein. So, Jay, pop into chat if you're in here. But what I could say, when you're looking at like rookie year projection plan to take a player after that big tier break, it really depends. What I try to do, and I did see someone, who was it? It was Dino. It was Jax Falcone from the Undroppables, who I really respect. I think he does a great job. He did tweet out something recently that I thought was kind of an important point. If you're sitting there at the back end of the first, your wide receiver 4 or 5 is on the board and you really like him, right? So let's say Thomas or Worthy is your wide receiver 4 and 5. I think that shopping those picks is probably the best strategy. And he talked about that. He said, hey, because there's so many question marks with Franklin too, right? Franklin, Thomas, Worthy, McConkey. If you can maybe move those picks for a veteran or move those picks for maybe that player like DJ Moore is, for example, if there's a rebuilding team out there that has more, maybe they're looking at it like, hey, I want to pivot off of him. If you can get more for that late first, right? A guy like that, wide receiver 2 with spike weeks, wide receiver 1, those type of things. And that's where I would generally speaking look at like the back end of first there. But yeah, when you talk about rookie production, how much you take, me, it's more about roles. So I'm not like verbatim in that production tier, like, hey, how did they do? Because things change. Like you think of Quentin Johnson now, his role is definitely going to change with Harbaugh and Greg Roman. Not for the better, I don't think, because I do think that they want to use, they're going to be heavy pro packages, run heavy schemes, those type of things. They're definitely going to limit Quentin Johnson's kind of viewpoint there. But then you look at like McConkey, where does he go? I've seen him mock to the Ravens a ton. Don't love that spot, right? So it really is going to come down to kind of how the team's going to use them. I want to jump on to Nick's question, since I just talked about it. But if Bowers already tied in 1 to 3, wouldn't Dunze be a smarter pick as he climb higher in value? I mean, you could say value if you want, but I think that when we think of these guys, they're already priced at that point. Like I think of Dunze, like when I look at like combined rankings, because we do combined rankings too, you're already basically, he's priced as a wide receiver 2 already. So unless he can get into that top 7 kind of mark in terms of the wide receiver position, like then you really already took him at his value price, right? I do think the point to this question I want to get to though is, yeah, Bowers might be already tight in 1, 2, 3, but the positional advantage of a tight end and that value there, because of the way we've seen, especially in premium, I think he's the better pick because you're still looking at that. Pitts held his value for 2 years. Right? Like Pitts, he had 1,000 yards, and even last year, he was still getting drafted with a potential outcome of being tight end 1 overall in Dynasty. So Bowers is going to do the same thing. Bowers is still going to hold that value where, because there's so many wide receivers, like when you're looking at the wide receiver classes that are coming next year, especially, like even if you just look at the 25 class, you're talking about McMillan, you're talking about Burden, you're talking about Evan Stewart, who I really like, and we don't even know who else is going to pop off yet, right? That, that profile just comes out of nowhere. Like Odunze has a chance to kind of just fall down, like Quentin Johnston, right? Bowers, the tight ends next year, they're okay. Oscar Delp, Benjamin Uris, like these type of guys, but you're not talking about guys that are really going to overtake Bowers because of that potential value, that potential ceiling. So that's kind of how I look at those two guys. If I'm in between them and tight end premium, you still are going to hold that value for Bowers. Unless you truly believe Odunze can be a top 5 guy, then yeah, go take Odunze. I'm not there with him yet, so I would lean the kind of safer value with Bowers, but totally get where you're coming from in that mindset. McMillan and Malik in the mid 4th. Yeah, I think that'll shift. I think the combine's going to really do some good for some of these guys. Malik Washington could really do well. Jalen Wright could maybe solidify himself possibly as a top 3 guy. McMillan is a guy that's really kind of going down in value. And if anybody's ever watched me, they know I love Jalen McMillan because he's from Fresno, close to where I'm at. So I've kind of watched him play in high school. And to me, he's a really good slot receiver. Like, and I don't think him and Polk should be this far apart. I love Polk and McMillan, but if I'm looking at a draft based on value, I'll take McMillan all day in the 4th rather than Polk in the late 2nd. So again, when we get into this combine next week, and again, that's what the other thing I was going to mention on here we are doing the Football Guys rookie guide. We already did the first version. The second version comes out right out of the combine. We plug in all the RAS, relative athletic score. We plug in all the numbers, and and that'll be more of our consensus rankings. So we're going to dive. We've been diving into all the other positions. We'll get our consensus rankings. Jay Stein will plug in the numbers from his analytical model, and that'll start solidifying kind of our ranks and solidifying that as we go into it. My guy Jagger. I still like Pitts. This is not a shot. I love you, buddy. But yes, there are people out there. I've taken Pitts. I did a charity league startup this year, and I think I took Pitts tight end 5, because of the value where it was at. There are still guys taking Pitts tight end 3. So you can't tell me that in 3 or 4 years, Bowers won't be taken there either, right? Like, I think that's just a built-in value. That's the other thing I just try to harp on with these positions. You don't see a ton of like top end tight ends with perceived value every single year, right? We had Pitts, we had Bowers, but after that, who are these tight ends? Now, Laporta wasn't consensus. He got there. There's always can be outliers there. But that is kind of the value game that you play, right? Wide receivers is always guys. Like, there's so many wide receivers. And I think we're starting to see that a little bit more with kind of running backs being devalued. People are going to be pushing up these wide receivers and incorporate their value already. And that's one of the things that me and Leo have talked about. But I do want to mention, like, you're not getting discounts anymore in Dynasty based on something that possibly could happen. So T. Higgins is a good example. I mean, we've been talking about T. Higgins beginning a contract or getting tagged for like 6 months on the Football Guys Dynasty show. That was going to happen. All these guys out here telling you to buy Higgins because his value is going to improve when he goes to wide receiver 1 somewhere. That's just not happening anymore, right? A lot of these built-in ceilings and floors for players already happen in Dynasty. Where you can extract value is these guys that come out of nowhere, right? Puka Nacua, for example, in rookie drafts. You look at Kyron Williams. Like, there are still value plays out there of people that they're not talking about, but what you're looking at is roles. You're not looking at perceived value. Oh, could be a wide receiver 1, could be a running back 1. Really, what you're looking at is how the coaching staff looks at them and, like, how are they drafting guys? Or, hey, how are free agency? Are they targeting him? Oh, there's opportunity there. Yes. There's a role there. Yes. Is he talented enough to kind of go into that? You got to start looking at it from that perspective, in my opinion, in Dynasty. I think too many times I hate looking at Dynasty as a stock market. It drives me crazy because I don't think that's how leagues play. Independent leagues don't play like that, right? If I'm in my home league and I say, oh, based on this value of market, this is what he owes me, and my home league guy's going to say, you're an idiot. No, I'm keeping this guy because I'm a Ducks fan. I love this guy. Like, Dynasty in a nutshell is not a stock market. It's not. Individual leagues play like that. Now, if you're in a high level league with guys that think like that, then yeah, you could probably use a stock market approach to your league. But in general, like, that's not working in just general Dynasty leagues. So I think that's something also to kind of note there. Now, if you have multiple seconds this year, I actually love the running back class. We saw the same a couple years ago with White Cook. Yeah. The other thing too that I want to mention with the running back class, once we get some draft capital, right? Once Trey Benson, let's say he goes to the round 3, it's inevitably a couple of these running backs going to be late first picks. So if you can, and you're going to see guys like possibly Brian Thomas, possibly Xavier Worthy, or let's say Bo Nix does get drafted late first round in the NFL draft. He's going to be a late first pick in Superflex. So there is an opportunity right now. You obviously can't buy first, but there's an opportunity to grab some early seconds in that 201 to 205 range and possibly 207 range, getting in there and really, really kind of extracting some value there because some of these wide receivers might drop. Or if someone overdrafts a running back that gets 3rd round capital and you really like the guy that got 4th round capital and he's sitting there in the middle of second, you go pounce on that, right? That's the other thing. When one area I've really looked with running backs, one thing I've changed is I don't really look at day 2 being just 2nd and 3rd round anymore for running backs. I think with the position being devalued, I think, especially even in Dynasty, but in real NFL markets out there and just how they're kind of devaluing the position overall, if a guy gets drafted in the 4th, he can still give you value, right? Brian Robinson, these guys like that, everybody's going to mention Dameon Pierce, Kyron Williams, those guys. Like, there's opportunity there now. I don't think day 3 capital is a death sentence. I think analytics guys will think that. But for me, I think you have to shift your narrative to how the position's being valued, right? I think, the last few years, they're comfortable drafting a guy in 5th, 6th, 7th round, but still giving him volume, right? Now, there's outliers. Zach Evans looks like a dead asset. RIP Zach Evans truthers. So that definitely happens. But I don't think that day 2, day 3 capital anymore is a death sentence. I think it's about roles, right? I think it's about, hey, does he fit that role? Now he's got to be talented. Tank Bigsby's probably one of the biggest misses from people in terms of, he came in, didn't that, we thought that, hey, he's going to have that, freaking role where he was going to be in the red zone. He's going to have the short yardage role and all of that. Maybe some pass catching work, because I think him and Etienne are pretty close as prospects of that. Didn't happen based on whatever role, scheme, and everything. So let's take that. Let's use that. And now this next year, kind of look and see, okay, these profiles didn't work. All right, what's going to work now? But I think just following how the offensive coordinators work, where that comes from. I wrote a big piece for Football Guys prior. I do a kind of a series of crowded running back rooms and who do you want? And it's a redraft / dynasty kind of article. I do both. And I was huge on Devin Singletary. Reason why? Bobby Slowick. I said, hey, that's the value, right? He's the cheapest running back in that room. He has pass catching upside. Hey, go follow him. And go draft him based on the Dameon Pierce. And I said that in redraft and dynasty. So follow the profiles of these offensive coordinators and how they look more than anything. Yeah, Evans. I like Evans, but it doesn't seem like he's getting a lot of love out there from that coaching staff. So I think we missed the boat on that one, but maybe not. I mean, Kyron gives us hope, right? So when you're looking at overall, that's generally speaking. As far as this, in terms of some values that I like. And if you have any other questions, you can drop them in the chat. I'm going to get out of here in about 5 minutes. But if you have some, drop them in there. When you're looking overall, you really see your tiers 106, 107, depending on what you think of Dunze. I do think I like Franklin going up to 108. I see a lot of narratives about Franklin that I don't think are fair to him. Saying that he gets pushed off the line. I didn't see a lot of getting pushed off the line because DBs are terrified of him beating them. So a lot of defenses played 10 yards back, gave him that cushion, which he definitely got better at as his career went on. So I like that version there. The other running backs that kind of went late, Kendall Milton is going to be that guy that sticks around the league. Just if he can stay healthy. I think that Peyton Barber-esque type guy. McClellan, same thing from Alabama. Really like him. When they needed a run and they needed 10 yards, 10 yards, or whatever the case may be, Alabama leaned on Jace McClellan. I saw it when I went to the Rose Bowl to watch Michigan play them. They really liked him. And I think that he has Brian Robinson vibes, right? Kind of similar profile. It's a lazy comp because they both played at Alabama. But I think that if you're looking for a running back that could possibly do that, McClellan is probably that guy there. Frank Gore is tough for me because, he ate up bad competition. His usage is hilarious, though. That dude played running back, wide receiver, quarterback. He was all over the place. But, Gore, to me, I guess it's not bad, late fourth, whatever. Go ahead and take him. But, again, I just struggle with kind of that profile. I get worried about that. Ali, if he didn't freaking hurt himself, he'd probably be in there, too. I know a lot of guys like Isaiah Davis. They're big fans of that. And, when we're thinking of kind of where that goes, what do we think of him? Will Shipley. I liked Will Shipley. I was surprised he came out in terms of that prospects there. But those other wide receivers there, Burton's, Ania Smith, those guys in that range. So we're going to be kind of hopping in and doing this. I'm going to try to do it on the weekends the best I can for the channel. Make sure you like the video. Hit that like. Give us some algorithm buzz out there. But we're just going to be diving in. If you want to participate in these, I'll drop it in the Devy Royale Discord. You can actually join that for the Patreon. It's really cheap. We just talk about something. I think it's $1 a month. And you guys it has a great people in there, guys that just like to talk ball. And there's no, we're not talking crap. We're just talking football, right? $1 a month. And I usually put these in there and say, hey, let's draft. Definitely going to be doing a little bit of startup drafts. I think next weekend I want to kind of do a startup dynasty draft where you guys kind of talk about where tiers are with rookies included to get you guys into that. And be sure to check out our dynasty show. Every other Thursday, me and Leo go live. We answer all kinds of different dynasty questions, dynasty trades, and those type of things. So I appreciate you guys tuning in here on a Saturday. I hope you guys enjoy your weekend. And as always, my DMs are open at @theboys_22 to answer your questions about Dynasty, Devy, or all of the above. Appreciate you guys.